Professor Omarova, as has been reviewed today, you've written on numerous topics and have frequently used the word radical to describe your own policy ideas. You've advocated for policies that would remake our entire financial system, such as advocating for government allocation of capital and credit through transfer of banking functions to the Federal Reserve, fully replacing private bank deposits, and in your own words, support policies that would effectively end banking as we know it. It's not surprising that the Independent Community Bankers of America have urged opposition to your nomination. Under your People's Ledger proposal, for example, community banks will be relegated to serving as representative offices of the Federal Reserve. Today, of course, they fund their balance sheets and lending operations primarily through FDI-insured deposits. The People's Ledger would make community banks almost wholly dependent on the Federal Reserve for funding through the discount window. And this funding would be contingent on the extension of, quote, qualified, end quote, loans in accordance with specified underwriting and other eligibility criteria. This could easily lead to the politicization of credit allocation, which is what I understand you advocate. This proposal is an anathema to community banks and our free market system. The core mission of community banks is support for small business and their households based on their knowledge and their borrowers and their communities. As recently as March in 2021, you said that we want certain of these disfavored industries to go away, and that we want them to go bankrupt if we want to tackle climate change. Today you said you didn't mean that phrase, but later in May of that same year, you proceeded to call for the debanking of these industries, saying the way we basically get rid of these carbon financiers is we starve them of their source of capital. Furthermore, you've proposed allowing the government to block credit to what you've called socially suboptimal industries. From your writings, we know that that includes the carbon industry, but I take issue with these statements. And I just don't believe that we should be encouraging our financial institutions or directing our financial institutions to bankrupt industries for political purposes. Let's not forget that the idea of controlling the allocation of capital is not new. In a recent administration, we had a project called Operation Choke Point, which sought to do exactly this. This time, one of its targets was the firearms industry. They were targeted by the federal government and the regulators and restricted in their ability to access banking services. Operation Choke Point was real, and it exceeded its legal limits. Professor, given your statements, how can we be confident that you won't pursue such radical actions as the head of the OCC and literally seek to starve legal and lawful industries of capital simply because they are viewed as politically unfavorable?
Senator, thank you for asking this question because it gives me a chance to provide some context and clarify my statements. I'm not sure that's a correct characterization of whatever I said about the oil and gas companies as calling for debanking. It was not made in the context of what banks should or should not do. I believe in private allocation of capital, and I believe in the fact that it should be banks making decisions to which company to lend and on what conditions, subject to the regulatory and supervisory requirements that they do it prudently. And the OCC's job is not to meddle into specific decisions on credit allocation on the ground. And as a regulator, if I'm confirmed, I fully intend to follow the rules and the law as it's written. The OCC's job is simply to ensure that when banks make those decisions, that they fully identify, understand, and account for the risks they're taking. And that's my position.
Well, you've just highlighted the point that I make. It's been suggested here that you can't achieve your objectives without Congress's approval. But under Operation Choke Point and other efforts that we've seen through the regulatory agencies, their power of supervision can be used without Congress's permission to allocate capital. And I just have a great concern. Do you believe that the firearms industry is a socially suboptimal industry?
Senator, I do not think much of firearm industries. I believe that if I'm confirmed as the Comptroller of the currency, my job will be simply to make sure that all national banks are safe and sound, and they take into account all the risk factors when they decide to lend to one business or another business. That
Well,
is not going to be up to me.
My time has expired, but let me just say that is exactly the argument that was made under Operation Choke Point, that we can evaluate the risk of these socially suboptimal industries and through our supervisory power drive them out of their source of capital. And that is an incredibly dangerous concept for us to be building into our system.